for our brothers. And then
What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Joe Hotagua. I'm a Sierra Leonean American that just spent the last 4 years living in West Africa. I'm in Sierra Leone right now. And as you can tell by the title, today we're going to talk about what it's like dealing with death and funerals in Sierra Leone. Now, everybody's different. It's done differently with different families. There are some things that you might notice that seem similar to what you expect in the United States. There are some things that are different, but we're going to talk about some of the costs associated with this and some of the things that you need to think about if you are planning to bury someone in Sierra Leone. As I mentioned, everybody's a little different. You may use different funeral homes, all of that kind of stuff, but we just want to talk about that. There's been a lot of questions about what the process looks like. And for those of you who are born in the United States, your parents are going to be buried in Sierra Leone or some other version of having family members being buried in Sierra Leone. I think this is going to be a really important live stream for you guys. So we're going to talk about it. But first, before we get into all of that, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Joannes or Joe Hotagua. As I said, I generally go by Joe. As I mentioned, I spent the last 4 years living in West Africa. I am a Sierra Leonean American, as I always wear on my wrist. My family is both Mende mostly and Creole mostly. Basically, that's generally how I identify as a Sierra Leonean. We're talking about Christians in this particular instance, and so this is how the process went for us. So we're going to talk about that. But before we get into all of that, first of all, let me know if you guys can hear me, and you can let me know where you're watching from. So if you guys can hear me, give me a thumbs up, and let me know where you're watching from. Shout out to Black Heritage Archivist, also known as Aisha Ladan. Shout out to Sierra Leoneans Killing It who joined, and all the other folks that are joining. Nate, Kumbu, Shad, you said you can hear me. Nice. Aisha said you can see me and hear me on IG. Awesome. So what about you guys on YouTube? Can you guys let me know if you guys can hear me and see me? And also let me know where you're watching from. My internet connectivity is not the greatest. We've had discussion on many occasions. There are challenges with internet connectivity here. We may have a solution. We talked about this on the Exposing Sierra Leone with Admire Demo from Sierra Leoneans Killing It. We've had that discussion, and we're hoping to have solutions so that we no longer have so many internet connectivity challenges whenever I'm here in the country. But let me know if you guys can hear me. Now, for those of you who are new, I think it's always good to kind of do a little bit of a brief intro on what the live stream generally is about and what I'm about. I kind of gave you a little bit about myself, but let's just talk about what we do. So this live stream is called Pan-African Perspectives, and we usually spend time delving into the real life experiences of visiting Africa, moving to the continent of Africa, investing in African ventures, buying land, and doing all things pertaining to, furthering the goal of seeing Africa restore its rightful place on the world stage. Our mission is to support an independent Africa and empower African people on the continent and or in the diaspora. So whether you're currently in Africa, you've recently migrated to somewhere outside of the continent of Africa, your ancestors were trafficked during the transatlantic slave trade, or if you're a foundational Black American, whatever way you identify yourself as a person of color from the continent, this live stream is for you. As I mentioned, my name is Joe Hotagua. I'm the host, and I'm the founder of Authentic African. And each week I'll share some of my experiences living, traveling, and or investing in Africa. And from time to time, I'll also be interviewing those who've made the move to the continent, offering their insights and their stories. So that is what you can expect from these live streams. Today, it's just me and my personal experience, and that is what we'll be talking about today. So let me go back to the comments, see if there's anybody who has messaged to say that you guys can hear or see me. Let me know if the connection is still clear. I'm looking here and it looks a little bit choppy. The audio seems to be skipping, and same thing with the video. Shout out to Aisha Ladan. She said, I'm currently in New Orleans doing family research. Nice, headed back to Cali in the morning. Okay, great. Shad, one of one, said, watching from California, Bay Area. Shout out to Shad. All right, cool. So without further ado, let's kind of get into what we came to talk about today. So a few weeks back, we talked about the fact that I was coming to Sierra Leone to deal with the process of this funeral. And as they say, it takes a village, you know, lots of help from my uncle, lots of help from an organization that my father was a part of. There were many people that were involved in this process, and this is not an easy process to do. And I would never recommend doing it by yourself. You definitely are going to need to have assistance from different people, whether that is financially, whether that is putting together programs, whether that is working on feeding people. There are a lot of elements to doing this. What you'll find in Sierra Leone is when it comes to marriages and when it comes to death, and this may be the same in the US, people show up to eat. Many people show up to eat. So there'll be many folks, and I won't just say that's everyone. That's not everyone's MO, but just know that you're expected to feed that many people. And there's a lot that is involved in that. And so, you know, I can't get into all the details of what was done here because much of it was kind of handled by other folks. But I will tell you that there are many different elements, whether that's buying cows or buying rice or buying the stew that goes in it or buying fish. You know, there are many different elements to ensure that everyone who attends walks away having eaten. Depending on the status of the person who has passed away, that'll also determine how much food and how much is required. And so those are all going to be important factors in this process that you'll have to think about. You know, just to kind of give you high level from, you know, what we did is we did a memorial service in the United States, and then we did a separate funeral and a service here. And so, you know, obviously that has two separate costs. There are different groups involved with different elements of those two things. But that like I said, it takes a village. There are many people involved in these kinds of processes. And so in particular, you know, what we're going to talk about today is specifically what happened on the ground here, just in terms of the church that he was involved with and how they were able to assist in terms of like putting the program together about what the whole program was going to be, who's reading what, who's doing what, all those kinds of things. You kind of just fill in names. So that I think kind of eliminates some of that. But there are so many other logistical elements that are required that you have to think about. That, you know, I'm going to do a vlog later where I'm going to go through like what this entire experience has been like from start to finish. But we talked about this on a separate live stream, the elements of, you know, what it's like to ship the remains of someone to Sierra Leone and the continent of Africa in general. There are just elements that you have to go through with the United States, right? So there's like infectious disease you have to go through in the US. You also have to go through, documents and records or whatever those two state departments you have to go through it, whatever state you're in the United States. It's specific to the United States. And then separately, you have to then go through the embassy of the country that the remains are being shipped to. So all three of those things have a process that you are required to go through before you can do it. Once they get here, there is supposed to be a funeral home on this side is responsible for receiving and potentially storing the remains of the individual that is being shipped home to be laid to rest. What I will say is, you know, they required someone from the family to come and view the remains to ensure it's the person and to ensure that they arrived intact, because things can happen in transportation and they just want to make sure that that's all done. And then they may have to store them for however long. In this case, for us, it was 2 weeks. Now, the church that he was involved in wanted to kind of welcome him back. And so, you know, we there were so many elements to this. You know, that's going to be in the vlog. I will just tell you, regardless of what industry you're dealing with, the frustrations that you're used to dealing with in this part of Africa, in terms of West Africa, are some of the same frustrations you will deal with when it comes to dealing with funeral homes as well. I will tell you that the driver was 3.5 hours later than he originally told me he was going to be, which meant that people were waiting outside for 2.5 hours. And of course, the expectation was that I should know where this person is because I'm the one communicating with them. But they did the typical thing and say, you know, I'm coming, I'm close, I'll be there shortly. And they weren't there shortly. It was over an hour and a half of us actually sitting outside, not to mention the previous hour that he already said he was nearby, but we just kind of left a little bit later just to ensure that we arrived when he arrived, and he still was later than that. And so, yes. So what are the costs associated with this, right? Like I'll walk you through what some of the costs were just in terms of the funeral home and the funeral home expenses and what they do, just so you guys can get an idea of what those costs are. And so the retrieval from the airport is 15,000 leones, or 15 million old leones. That's about $625. At this point in time, at the point of this recording. Transportation, because he was arriving in Lungi International Airport and was being driven to Bo, that was another 6.5 million leones, or 6,500 new leones. 6.5 million is the old leon number, 6.5 million is the new leons number. That's $270. Storage, and the funeral itself, the total came out to 1,500 new leons, 1,500 new leons, or 1,500 old leons per week. So for 2 weeks, that's either 3 million or 3,000, and that's another $125. So all in all, if you count that all up, that's $1,020. So that is the cost. $1,020 was the cost from the funeral home on this side to retrieve him, transport, store, and do the funeral. So that was the cost associated. And then, of course, the drivers were asking for help with buying food and transport on the way home. So there's a little extra there. So they'll say $1,025 or $1,030, let's just say, was the cost associated with just the funeral home. And that's the part that I know intimately, because I was communicating that with the funeral home themselves, and I was the one who remitted that payment. So any questions on that so far? I know this is a quiet live stream. I know maybe because the topic is morbid that people aren't as communicative on this live stream. Okay, but there are some questions. Shad, one of one, said, I'm curious to know about how you deal with medical out there on the continent, like how and quality of care compared to the West. We'll get to that. We'll get to that in a moment, because I think that's actually kind of important part of the discussion. So we'll talk about that. But we'll stick on topic here, and then we'll come back to that for sure. We'll get to that though, Shad. So I won't forget about you. Aisha Ladan, or Black Heritage Archivist, is saying, my condolences to you and your family. I appreciate that. Thank you. And Changeistry is saying, sincere condolences. I appreciate that. Thank you. So doesn't seem to be too many questions on this process. So that was basically the basic cost. So for those of you who are thinking about it, that is the cost as of today, at this very moment, October 7th, 2024, when this live stream is being recorded. That could change and likely will change in the future. And the funeral home that I'm using is one that was recommended to me by different people. In general, they do a pretty good job. There were just some elements that are just like individuals that I wouldn't blame necessarily the company for. It's just the driver was just being the driver and doing what he does best, which is lie about his whereabouts. So that's a whole thing, and that's a conversation for the vlog, because you'll see how dealing with that frustration in real time, what that looks like. So you'll get all of that later, but I just wanted to kind of give you that high level. Now, separately from that, what the process was like. So as I mentioned, the organization he was a part of at the church he was a part of, and I don't know how much they want to be mentioned in this kind of stuff, so I'll just say that, we did the we did like a procession of him coming in. And they went with us all the way from, you know, kind of the Bow checkpoint, right, which is right outside of the city of Bow, the second city, right, you know, in Sierra Leone, and right to the funeral home, Columbia Davies Funeral Home. Then the next morning, he was retrieved by that same group from the funeral home and taken to the chief compound where he grew up, and there was an hour-long viewing, and then from there, from 9 to 10, then from 10, there was the meeting hall at the church for the organization he was a part of, for about 20 minutes or so, and then we arrived at the church, and then the funeral mass was at 11. And then the mass was from 11 to 12. And then the funeral procession, which was about a little over an hour and change, about a 5-mile walk and or drive, depending on, you know, what you decided you wanted to do. We had a family member decide that they wanted to walk. About halfway through, they realized 5.5 miles in the hot sun is a lot harder than you might think. So they ended up getting on a bike and still doing the rest of the trip outside of a vehicle. Many of us sat inside a vehicle with air conditioning because it was very hot that day. But luckily, it didn't rain until much later, so we got a chance to just be cool and dry. So that was. All right, so thank you, Danny. Appreciate it. Pro Woman says sincerest condolences, best wishes for strength and comfort during this time. Hugs. I appreciate it. So yeah, I mean, it was actually it was, I think, a well done and well put together. There's a lot of moving pieces, and like I said, it does require many people to kind of help with something like this. So for those of you who are thinking about going through this, and you know, I would implore you to ensure as much as possible that you lean on your local relatives or relatives who come here often to help with the process. I was lucky enough to have that, but that is not something that everybody has. Is people that will volunteer or step in to do that. You need to ensure that you have that. That's going to be super important for you if you're going to go through this process. I've talked to other people about this. You know, as you guys might know, my co-host on Exposing Sierra Leone and my demo, went through a similar circumstance in the last couple of years. And it just requires a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of moving pieces. So having people here locally who understand the process is going to be super, super important. For someone like me who is, as much as I can, I'm trying to catch up and learn my cultures, because there are two major cultures that I'm a part of here in Sierra Leone, right? Two different tribes that have different ways of approaching things. And I'm still trying to get up to speed, even as someone who's lived on the continent for almost 4 years, who's been coming to Sierra Leone twice a year. You can't really prepare yourself for something like this, and knowing all the details, even if you've been to other funerals, it's still difficult to know all the different pieces from the inside. So it's really helpful to have people who do know more to drive a little bit to kind of help the process. And so, but yeah, I mean, that was basically it. I mean, that was the cost of everything, and that was the process. Do you guys have any questions, thoughts that you guys want to share? Let me just double check. While I wait for your questions, Shad 1 asked this very important question. He asked, "I'm curious to know about how you deal with medical out there on the continent, like how and quality of care compared to the West." So let me say this. If you guys might remember, I went live with Kia Wakesho Simmons, and she talked about medical tourism to Kenya, which happens a ton. You know, as it pertains to Sierra Leone, many of our leaders, you know, tend to go get medical care elsewhere, whether that's Nigeria, that's Ghana, that's the UK, United States, wherever that is. They do tend to go to other places for medical care. I would say that that is the general consensus amongst folks that I know. When people who retire back home, or even just retire and move here, they still do have a primary physician back home, and they go check in with them, as do I, and as did I over the last few years. Now, I did have a primary care physician in Ghana, Dr. Bedu, who was great. And so that was somebody who I went to often, and I would definitely recommend him to other people. He was recommended to me by a friend of mine when she and her partner lived in Ghana. And so, yeah, I would definitely recommend him to other people. He's great. Even just recently, I had a friend whose parents were going through something medical wise, and he kind of went through all of the options available to us if we were to send them to Ghana to get it done. In the end, they chose to do the procedure here in Sierra Leone, but he was great about that. Really, really great guy. And that's what I find with many people like him is, he came back here to practice here after practicing in the UK for however many years, 20 years. So anyway, to answer your question, is compared to the West, it depends on the country. The continent is very big, and South Africa and Kenya are number 1 and number 2 in terms of how people rank medical care. I don't know the rest of the countries. That information is coming actually directly from Kia Wakesho-Simmons and Traverse Culture. She was the one who actually helped us understand that. And she's dealing with some medical tourism from other people around the continent coming to Kenya. And South Africa as well. I mean, people definitely go down there as well if they can afford it. Many folks just go to a closer neighboring country, especially not requiring a visa to enter. So like many people in Sierra Leone go to Ghana or go to Nigeria for medical care because it is closer in proximity than the other 2 countries that I mentioned. Also doesn't require a visa because they're ECOWAS countries. And if you have a Sierra Leone passport, you can travel to those countries. Here's a question from Black Heritage Archivist. Question: what would you say the most different compared to funerals in the West? That's a great question. Now, I haven't attended, believe it or not, I haven't really attended many funerals in the West. I remember going to a funeral when I was a preteen or a teenager. I didn't want to see a dead body, none of that. So I was kind of just standing in the back. If I remember correctly, I kind of have this hazy feeling. I also went to one of someone who took their own life, unfortunately, when I was about 18 years old. Now that I'm thinking through my life experiences, that was one I went to, which I kind of buried in the back of my mind. I almost forgot about that. I was 19, actually, when I went to that one. So what can I say is different? I think what's different is, in this case, in all instances, and the same thing with my aunt too. Like, how can I even forget that? My aunt in 2010. They were all Christian. So generally there are similarities. I mean, this case was Catholic, but the other 3 were Christian. What I would say about them, the major differences are the cultural elements in terms of like the repast, in terms of food, in terms of, prayers and ensuring that everyone eats and doing those kinds of things. Those elements are going to be different, and it all depends on the cultural background that you're from, right? And so, there's usually what they call the beringos, where people go to support the people. So I think it really depends on the family and what the family is, what their background is, right? Everybody's a little bit different. But I would say the easiest way to describe it is church services are pretty similar, right? We went to a Catholic church service, a Catholic mass in the States. And I went to a Catholic mass here, and to compare the two, the Catholic masses are pretty similar. I mean, their processes are pretty similar, and I wouldn't say they were very different. It was And then in both instances, of course, it was still dealing with the same family, just different people in different places. So there was still like kind of an after, what we call a repast, where it was a little bit different in terms of what the food was, in terms of what food was served, because it's based on what is available in the locality. And so but I would say they're very, very similar in that way. But when I went to those American funerals, the American funeral that I went to, there's still a kind of a similar part of the process. But what I found was many of us who went to that funeral, to the young lady who tragically took her life, we kind of went to the repast afterwards at the funeral home. There was some food served there, and then we all went our different ways. We didn't hang around too much around afterwards, because I was also friends, not family. And so we kind of stayed, I think, one more day at a hotel, and then went back, if I'm not mistaken, and it's kind of blurry to me. Sorry, guys, I got a call. So my network went out. I apologize for that. My network went out because I got a random phone call, unexpected. So let me just see if there were any other questions, comments, or thoughts before, if I answer. Hopefully that answered your question. I know that's kind of vague. Aisha, hopefully that answers your question. I can definitely give you like a more detailed rundown of some very, very specific stuff, but I think that's from a high level. That's what it was. So you and I want to talk, we can talk about it for sure. Pro Woman said, were you on Culture with Funeral Protocol? She's mentioning the natural Ghana girl whose Ewe dressed inappropriately for her Ewe dad's funeral in Ghana. Well, I mean, I wore clothes from Harry Cotton, which is a Ghanaian designer. So it's like Africana style dress. It was black, and it had a place for a pocket square. So our colors were kind of like black and white. And so I'm pretty sure I was dressed appropriately. I think most people, because it was a Christian wedding, a Christian funeral, Christian wedding. It was a Christian funeral. I think most people dressed in like suits, but there were many people wearing Africana. I mean, I don't think it was it wasn't like what you might see with like maybe with Ewe. I don't know how they normally do things, because of course, while I was in Ghana, even though I was there for 2 years, I never went to any funerals while I was there. So I don't know what people do there. But yeah, I didn't run into that issue here. For me, it's just like, it's kind of all a blur, right? When you're going through it, you're kind of just going through the motions. People are giving you instructions. Here's what you do next. Here's what you do. Here's how this thing happens. So you just kind of go through the process. But yeah, I don't think that was an issue with ours. Even a good friend of mine who normally is a little bit more liberal with their dress code, was very conservatively dressed for this particular, funeral. Africana says, condolences to you and your family. I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, so, I wanted to try to make this educational as much as possible. As you can imagine, it's been a busy week. And so I haven't had time to put together an interview with someone, another topic to talk about. But since this is topical and something I just went through this past weekend, I thought it made sense to communicate to you what that process was like, to try to help you guys all understand what could potentially come your way if you decide to bury a family member, specifically in Sierra Leone. It could be different in Ghana, as was described here by Pro Women with what happened with Della, aka Natural Ghana Girl. And there may be some differences there, but specifically, for my experience, that's what it is. I mean, I can't go through everything much more in detail, because of course there's going to be a vlog, and there are things that don't need to necessarily be discussed publicly. But I think you should expect the unexpected, prepare for some things. Here's some other things to think about as well. Some things to think about when it comes to accessing bank information. one thing that I found to be true in the United States and also here is power of attorney immediately stops upon the person's passing, which means you have to go through other means to be able to get access to their bank account and other assets. So, in the United States, you have to go through probate court. Here in Sierra Leone, there's a different process. You go through the Register General. There's documentation you must produce, et cetera, and they walk you through that process. But there are processes that you have to go through, and it's always good here, at least, to get a lawyer to help you through that process. In the United States, they recommend you get a lawyer because going through the probate process can be a little bit of a pain. But if you have a little bit of patience and a little bit of time, and depending on your budget, it might be worthwhile to look into it. You can simply just go to Perplexity and AI software and ask them what you need to do in your state. It combs the web and it tells you what steps you need to take and even what links you need to go to download the documentation you need to submit for that process, which is what I did. So that is something I'll be doing upon my return. Cool. Look, we went 34 minutes today. I don't know if there's any other, let's see if there's any other comments or questions from IG. Shout out to Posh Africana who joined. Bless Salon Bobo just joined. Shout out to you. Abram Harding joined. Shout out to you. Tina Schmidt. All of you guys who joined, I really appreciate you guys. Okay, Pro Woman has another questions. Has another comment. Let's see. Sierra Leone's funerals seem quick. In Ghana, funerals or even a year for chiefs and queen mothers. And Nkrumah's funeral took a year. Yeah, and I also when I first moved to Ghana, oh my goodness, how am I forgetting his name? He's another very popular president in Ghana, had just recently passed. And I should know my Ghanaian history. So forgive me, guys. My brain is a little scrambled. There's been a lot going on, which you're not all going to ever technically find out. Some of it's not for public consumption. But his name is escaping me. And it's as soon as I get off this line, I'm sure I'm going to remember. But anyway, he was a prominent figure in Ghanaian history. And he had passed the week that I arrived to Ghana. And they had viewings for days. There was a glass kind of surrounding with an open casket, and people were like coming there and kind of walking around it, getting a chance to look at him. J.J. Rawlings. There you go. Jordan Cook with the save. Thank you. Yes. So J.J. Rawlings had just recently passed when I moved. I moved in December of 2020 to Ghana. And there was a lot of pomp and circumstance. There was a lot to do about his passing. He was seen as a major historical figure in Ghanaian history. Kwame Nkrumah is one. I think J.J. Rawlings is another one. These two folks, polarizing, but also very prominent figures in Ghanaian history, and the two of them, were given very long funerals. Now, those two people also were presidents in Ghana, so very different. Now, I do know Pro Woman's mentioning that chiefs and queen mothers can also take a while, sometimes up to a year. I think that it all depends on the country, the culture. I think for us here, excuse me, our process, I guess, maybe is a little bit shorter than that, at least from my own personal experience. So we'll definitely have to take a look at some other folks and see what they say. But from my experience, yeah, it does seem to be a little bit shorter here than what you might have seen or heard of from Ghana. Tiggy says, praying for you, Joe, my brother, and I went through the same process 2 years ago in November. It's not easy, but God is good. I appreciate it. Thank you, Tiggy. Jordan Cook is saying, I'm from Brooklyn, bro. Crown Heights. When you coming back? I'll be back this week. Yes, I'll be back this week. So Jordan, shoot me a DM. Let's chat. I will say in general, I don't always just meet up with every single person who reaches out on social media. as you can imagine, if we do that, then there'd be no time for anything else, as you can imagine, because you guys are all very engaged. And so, but I do try to find ways to meet up with people at specific events. So there's the Sierra Leone Diaspora Conference that's coming up in October. It's very likely in a couple weeks, actually. Is it next weekend? I think it might be next weekend. Not this coming weekend, but the following. I'm looking to potentially be going there. There's also a family conflict that weekend, so we'll see. But I may be going to that. But those kinds of events is probably where it's most likely that we'll be able to kind of meet up, because it allows me to kind of have a bunch of people come together at the same time, as opposed to trying to meet with people one-off, which is just kind of impossible to do, as you can imagine. As you guys have helped the platform grow so much, it's very challenging to get to meet everybody individually. But if you're going to the Sierra Leone Diaspora Conference, definitely let me know. Shoot me a DM, and we should definitely talk about it. Who else has joined? A bunch of other folks have joined. Joshua, shout out to Joshua. Shout out to Omos, Salon Dev. Shout out to you all for stopping by the live stream. Who else, and what else do we want to talk about? So that's basically it. If there aren't any other questions, okay, here we go. Africana says next weekend, October 19th in Gaithersburg, Maryland. If you're talking about the Diaspora Investment Conference, yes, that is the conference I am talking about. So yes, it is the weekend of the 19th. So there's a family conflict, but we'll see whether I'm going to the family event or the event in Gaithersburg, Maryland. It is still TBD. But yeah, I'd like to attend both, but that might be very difficult considering the distance from each other. Pro Woman says, wasn't your loved one high status in Salon? You come from royalty, prominent chiefs, etc. Correct? That is correct. How do I describe it? The best way I think I could describe it is there was no interest in officially becoming paramount chief, even though through lineage he could have become chief. So, but his return to Sierra Leone kind of equated to being like a chief. I think many of the many families that are interconnected kind of saw him as such. And so in that sense, as the son of a chief, and as a nephew of another chief, there was a need to have a certain style of funeral to see him off. As it pertains to his particular status, I would say the best way to describe it is many people saw him as a chief or as a king, but that was more of an unofficial title. But but I think many people saw him as that as well, just because of the role he played in so many people's lives, which I'm hearing a lot about now. Because when people are alive, you don't necessarily see or know all the things that they're doing for different people. It's when they've moved on that people do come and tell you how they were involved in their lives and what they meant to them. So I hope that answers your question, Pro Woman. I think it's kind of hard to describe because it's in an unofficial capacity, and there was disinterest in the official capacity. And so that is why, that is not something that, he had as an official title, although, the official title is son of a chief, which is a pretty prominent title in and of itself, even if you're not chief, right? So yeah, good question. All great questions today too, by the way. Any other questions from folks? Let me see if there's any questions on Instagram. I'm operating with one screen today, so I'm flipping between different tabs in different browsers so that I can get to your questions. All right, cool. Well, we've been on for 40 minutes so far. Okay, so Jordan Cook had a good question. This is definitely off topic, but Jordan, here's what I would say. I went live weekly up until about 3 weeks ago with African Stream on a podcast, or with a live stream we would call This Week in Africa. Unfortunately, African Stream has been kicked off of YouTube, so you're not going to be able to go to their channel and follow along with the live streams that we're doing there. However, you can go back through this channel and see the live streams we did there. And you'll just see it. I mean, it's myself and a young woman named Inem Richardson. And you'll see the conversations that we had about all of what was happening across the continent of Africa, including much discussion about Ibrahim Traoré, because she does currently live in Burkina Faso. And so she and I would talk much about Ibrahim Traoré and my early, let's say, I don't want to say skepticism, but just my early, my at the beginning is just saying like, well, let's see what happens. And it seems as though he's following through on some of the things that he said. There also seems to be some propaganda against him. There also seems to be some questions about, especially from the West, about, his intentions and all kinds of things. From what I'm seeing and from what I'm hearing from people on the ground, they're very, very excited about what he's done, and they're doing everything they can to protect him. And so from that standpoint, it seems that it wasn't a coup, but more of a revolution. And the difference, I think, is that in a coup, it's just a few that want to seize power and do take power. In a revolution, it's the many, meaning the masses, that want to see it. And it seems as though, there's a very few folks that wanted to keep the old regime and the old ways of being employed and employed well, and weren't operating in the best interest of the country, according to those who have now taken over and the people who support them, right? So from what I can say, from what I've seen, he's been starting the process of doing some of the things he said he was going to do, and it's seeming to be going in the right direction. So that's what I would say. From what I'm seeing, I approve of what he's been doing so far with, what he's doing, with the mines and with the alliances and stuff like that. I'm all for a diplomatic resolution to different things. I don't always know if incremental change is the best change. And so in some instances, I'm not a big fan of military takeovers of governments. That's not necessarily, I don't get excited about that idea. I mean, I was in Sierra Leone when there was an attempted coup. And so that to me is not necessarily the outcome I'd like to see. I'd like to see a democratically elected person. But absent of that, and in a situation where it seems as though the broader electorate wanted him anyway, so far it seems good. Jordan Cook saying tons of propaganda against him, and we know who is behind it. I will definitely rewatch your old videos regarding Ibrahim. Yeah, there's plenty there. You'll see it. He's in thumbnails and all kinds of stuff, so you'll see it. I have to be careful what I say as it pertains to the Sahel region, Ibrahim Traoré, and other things, because what I don't want it to come across is that I am, state sponsored by, or foreign entity or whatever you call it, because it seems as though that's what ended up happening with African Stream. So, in those live streams, I was asking mostly the opinion of my co-host in order to absolve myself from any potential challenges that could come my way, showing support and also negatively discussing the United States and the West. I try to refrain from doing that, just in the sense that, we talk about what all the things that people say they like and they don't like. But I'm also very clear that, freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequences. And you also have to be very careful how you discuss the United States and their adversaries and or their friends and their foreign policy. It's a long way to answer your question. Answers your question, but as you can imagine, I have to be careful about how I answer a question like that. Jordan Cook says African Stream was awakening minds and they were silenced, accused of being funded by Russia. Yes, that is what they're accused of, specifically RT. What I'd love to do is try to get Ahmed, the CEO of African Stream, on to talk about what he's experienced. I'm not saying that I will, but I'd like to try to get him on. So I do plan to reach out to him and see if we can have that discussion. But I know that there's some things that are happening legally behind the scenes, and so he may not be able to speak about it. But yeah, I've thought about bringing him on and. All right. So as you can see, the internet is not cooperating with me today. Um, so I'm gonna have to end the live stream here very shortly. One last question. It looks like from Pro Women, who's saying, was the funeral more of a celebration of his life or mourning of his death? Came in late. You may have explained that already. I think it was kind of a bit of both. I mean, we didn't specifically call it one way or another, but I think, in some cases it was a celebration, in other cases it was a mourning. I mean, I think it depends on who you were, and where you were throughout this weekend. But I think it can be seen both ways. I definitely think it could be seen both ways. All right, cool. So, guys, look, the internet is not cooperating. The next two live streams, check back in on Sunday. We're doing a live stream with Exposing Sierra Leone, where we're going to be talking about some things happening specifically in Sierra Leone, as we always do. And then next Monday, we'll have another live stream where I'm back with Pan African perspectives. So stay tuned. Come back next on Sunday. And oh, and by the way, a ton of content has been going up on Tanzania, and most of you guys aren't seeing it. Since this whole African Stream thing, certain things have been, being shadow banned and all of that. So definitely come back to the channel. If you guys are at all interested in traveling or thinking about ever going to Tanzania, I have a bunch of content to show what my experience was like with Maximum Impact. I definitely recommend you go and check it out. My content is being suppressed. As you guys might know, many of you don't get the notifications anymore for the live stream. And so I definitely recommend you guys go check it out and support it and share it with other folks. Also share this with folks that might be dealing with similar circumstances so they know what to potentially expect to some small degree. And like I said, the vlog will be coming out later with more of those details. I do want to have to end this here because it's already been very, very poor in terms of internet connectivity, but I appreciate you all joining and engaging in the conversation. And I will be seeing you all on Sunday. Bye, guys.